It started like any other late afternoon, the kind that hums quietly in the background of an unremarkable day. The highway stretched ahead, the sun melting into the asphalt, and the air carried that lazy, golden haze that makes everything look softer than it really is. I wasn't looking for trouble, or nostalgia, or anything meaningful. I was just looking for a drink and a place to rest my feet. That's how it always begins. The moments that change something in you never announce themselves. The bar was exactly what you'd expect out here. A crooked sign that buzzed half the letters, a gravel lot with 2 trucks and a motorcycle, and a door that looked like it had been kicked open more times than it had been unlocked. I didn't think much of it. I'd been here before, or maybe somewhere just like it, enough times that they all blurred together. The kind of place where the air smells like stale beer, barbecue smoke, and quiet grudges. When I walked in, the light changed. The interior was dim, all amber glass and shadows, with the low hum of country music playing from a jukebox that sounded like it was coughing its way through the last song it would ever sing. A couple of heads turned, the usual routine when someone new steps in. But this wasn't the usual kind of attention. There was something else in the air, not curiosity, but recognition. The bar owner was behind the counter, wiping a glass that probably wasn't getting any cleaner. He was broad-shouldered, with that weary look of someone who's seen too many versions of the same story play out between his walls. His eyes met mine, and for a second, he froze. Then his jaw tightened, and the corner of his mouth twitched into something between a grimace and a sigh. "You again?" he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. The words hit heavier than I expected. A few people looked up from their drinks. A couple of others whispered. I felt that slow burn of being recognized in a place you didn't plan on being remembered. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, something shifted in the corner. A table of 5 men sat near the jukebox. Their conversation stopped cold. They turned, one by one, faces worn and lined, each carrying the kind of expression that comes from long years and longer memories. One of them leaned forward, squinting through the low light, and then nodded, slow, deliberate. The scrape of chairs echoed across the floor as they stood. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They just straightened their backs, lifted their hands, and saluted. In that moment, every sound in the bar vanished. The music, the clinking glasses, the hum of the fridge, gone. It was like the air itself stopped moving. The bar owner froze mid-motion, his rag hanging in the air. I could feel every eye in that room on me, but I wasn't sure why. There's a strange thing that happens when you realize people remember you for something you didn't come to talk about. It's like a mirror you weren't ready to look into. I hadn't come to make a scene, hadn't come to be recognized. I was just passing through, the same as always. But reputation doesn't ask for permission before it walks ahead of you. It travels faster than your footsteps and lingers longer than your name. The salute wasn't mocking. It wasn't performative. It was genuine, quiet, steady, and full of weight. It said things words couldn't, and it carried the kind of respect that can't be bought, borrowed, or faked. That kind of moment doesn't come from luck. It comes from something you did long before, something that left an echo. The bar owner blinked, realizing what was happening, and his expression softened, confusion melting into something closer to understanding. He didn't say another word. The rest of the room followed suit, silence thick and respectful, as if everyone suddenly remembered they were standing in the middle of something that mattered. And I stood there, feeling both exposed and unseen at the same time. It wasn't pride, not really. It was something quieter, the shock of being remembered when you thought the world had already moved on. Unexpected recognition, especially in a place where you were just trying to disappear, carries its own kind of gravity. You walk in expecting nothing, and the world reminds you that even when you think you've slipped through unnoticed, someone, somewhere, never forgot. Reputation is a strange thing. You can't touch it, can't hold it, but somehow it moves faster than you, whispers louder than you ever meant to speak. It builds itself quietly from the fragments of what you've done, what people think you've done, and what they've decided to believe in between. It's invisible until it walks into the room before you do. That day, standing in that bar, I felt the full weight of that truth. The air told me more about myself than any mirror could have. The moment those men stood up and saluted, the space shifted. Every eye in the room seemed to recalibrate, moving from judgment to curiosity, from assumption to awareness. It was as if an invisible switch had been flipped, changing the temperature of the entire place. The bar owner, who just a moment earlier had looked at me with suspicion and annoyance, now looked like a man trying to reconcile two versions of the same story, the one he thought he knew, and the one he was suddenly realizing he didn't. I could see it written across their faces. This wasn't about me walking in that door. It was about everything that had walked in behind me. The stories, the memories, the unspoken things that had traveled with me even when I tried to leave them behind. Power doesn't always come from status or money or appearance. Sometimes, it comes from the quiet respect you've earned without meaning to, from moments no one saw, or from actions that spoke louder than any explanation could. The room seemed to breathe differently now. A few people straightened up, like they didn't want to be caught underestimating the wrong person. A few others just stared, trying to piece together the connection, trying to understand why a group of old men had just stood to honor someone who looked like a tired traveler with dust on his boots and a crease on his brow. The power of reputation isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it just sits there, quiet, undeniable, reshaping how people see you without you saying a single word. That's the thing about unseen impact. It's the sum of everything you've done when no one was watching. It's in the favors you never mentioned, the choices you didn't brag about, the times you showed up when it didn't benefit you. People remember those moments, even if you forget them. They add up quietly in the background until one day, they find you again, reflected in someone else's eyes. I didn't ask for that recognition. If anything, it made me uncomfortable. But there's something humbling about realizing that your presence can change the mood of a room, not because of how you look or what you say, but because of the history attached to your name. The respect in those men's salute didn't come from coincidence. It came from something deeper, something shared, something I might have even downplayed in my own mind. It reminded me that sometimes the things we consider ordinary in our own lives are extraordinary in someone else's story. The bar owner finally set the glass down. His tone had changed when he spoke again, softer, cautious. "Didn't know," he muttered, almost to himself. "Didn't realize." I didn't respond. There wasn't anything to say. Words would have only diluted the weight of the moment. The silence said enough. It carried the tension of realization, the kind that makes people see you differently not because you've changed, but because they finally understand what you've been all along. It's easy to underestimate the reach of what we do. You might think your actions fade after the moment passes, but they ripple, carried by the people who witnessed them, told again by the ones who were touched by them, and eventually they circle back. Sometimes that circle is wide, sometimes it's quick, but it always returns. The power of reputation is that it doesn't need your permission to move. It lives independently of you, growing roots in places you've never been, turning into stories you didn't tell yourself. Standing in that bar, I could feel the shift from being just another face in the crowd to someone whose story preceded him. It wasn't about ego or pride. It was about responsibility, the awareness that what we do leaves a mark, even in small, forgotten corners of the world. The recognition wasn't about glory, it was about weight, about the reminder that even the smallest acts, the ones done in silence, can echo louder than the ones done in the spotlight. The bar's quiet hum returned, but softer now, more measured. People whispered in tones that carried respect instead of gossip. The bartender's expression had lost its edge. He poured a drink without being asked, setting it in front of me like an apology he didn't have the words for. The glass clinked softly on the counter, a simple sound that somehow carried more meaning than the noise that came before. In that moment, I understood that reputation isn't built by noise or attention. It's built by consistency, by character, by the parts of yourself that remain steady when no one's watching. It's a currency that can't be bought or faked. It's earned, often when you're not even aware you're earning it. And when it finally returns to you, when you see the respect it commands in places you least expect, it reminds you that the world is always paying attention, even when you think it isn't. Judgment is one of those things that moves faster than truth. It's instinctive, automatic, built into the way people survive in a world that runs on quick impressions. When I walked into that bar, the owner's reaction said it all. His tone carried the weight of assumption. A verdict passed before the trial even started. "You again" wasn't just irritation, it was a label. It told everyone in the room who they thought I was before I had the chance to speak for myself. That's how it usually goes. You walk into a place, and people decide your story without knowing a single chapter. The air in that room was heavy with the kind of judgment that thrives in small spaces. In places like that, news travels faster than light, and stories stretch longer than truth can keep up with. I could feel the quiet stares from the corner, the half-curious, half-critical looks of people who wanted to believe they already knew the ending. That's how it starts. You're defined by whispers, by someone else's version of what you've done. It's easier for people to file you under a convenient label than to understand the messier reality of who you are. But judgment has a funny way of flipping when confronted with evidence that can't be denied. When those men stood up and saluted, the room froze. It wasn't just respect they were showing. It was a direct contradiction to everything those onlookers thought they knew. The owner's expression cracked open, the irritation giving way to surprise, then confusion. The same people who were smirking a moment earlier suddenly didn't know where to look. In an instant, the entire power dynamic of that room turned upside down. That's what truth does when it finally catches up. It doesn't shout. It simply exists, undeniable. It doesn't need an announcement or a defense. One gesture, one action, can undo an entire web of false impressions. The bar, which had been filled with the easy confidence of judgment, now felt uncertain. The owner who had written me off as trouble was now reevaluating every assumption. You could see it in his face, the moment realization hits that you might have been wrong all along. It's not an easy thing for pride to swallow. Judgments are built on shortcuts. People make them because it saves them the effort of understanding. But when faced with a truth that challenges that comfort, something shifts inside them. You could feel that shift in the room. The discomfort, the recalibration, the way people started to watch instead of assume. The same faces that once held dismissal were now filled with curiosity. It's a small victory, but it's a real one, watching prejudice dissolve under the weight of reality. The sound of the chairs scraping against the wooden floor echoed like a verdict being overturned. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Those men didn't have to explain who I was or why they were saluting. The gesture spoke louder than words ever could. And for everyone watching, that moment forced them to reconsider what they believed. In a single breath, the narrative changed. The man they thought was a problem had become someone they suddenly respected, maybe even admired. The owner's posture softened, the stiffness melting into something uncertain. He looked at me differently now, as if trying to see past whatever rumor or memory had shaped his earlier reaction. He didn't apologize, but he didn't need to. The silence between us was apology enough. The bar felt smaller, quieter, like everyone was collectively replaying their assumptions in their heads. You could almost feel the sound of thoughts shifting. That's the thing about judgment. It feels solid until it meets contradiction. Then it starts to crumble. People cling to their assumptions because they make the world simple, predictable. But when they're forced to confront evidence that doesn't fit, they have no choice but to rebuild their understanding. That's what was happening in that moment. You could see the gears turning, the unspoken acknowledgement spreading through the room that maybe they'd been too quick to decide. Flip judgments don't just change how people see you. They change how they see themselves. They remind them how easy it is to be wrong, how fragile certainty really is. It's uncomfortable, realizing that the person you dismissed might be the one who deserves your respect. That discomfort filled the bar, thick and quiet, a kind of collective humility that no one wanted to admit out loud. The man behind the counter finally broke the tension by sliding a glass across the bar toward me. He didn't say anything, but the gesture was different this time. It wasn't just service, it was acknowledgement. The eyes around the room softened, the energy shifting from suspicion to a kind of reluctant admiration. It was subtle, but real. The story had changed without anyone saying a word. That's how fast it can happen. One moment, you're the stranger everyone whispers about. The next, you're the person they rise for. The one who carries a story they didn't bother to learn. Judgment flips like that, suddenly, silently, powerfully. It doesn't ask permission. It just changes, leaving everyone who once doubted you wondering what else they might have gotten wrong. Respect is never something you can demand. It's something that grows in the quiet spaces between your actions and the way the world remembers them. It doesn't always show up when you expect it, and it rarely comes wrapped in praise or recognition. Sometimes it waits, buried under years of silence, until the right moment pulls it to the surface. That night in the bar was one of those moments. The men who stood and saluted weren't reacting to my presence alone. They were reacting to something larger, to the memory of what had been done long before, to the kind of respect that lingers unseen until the world decides to show it. The strange thing about respect is that it doesn't need to be witnessed to exist. You don't have to be in the room for it to form. It builds in the echoes of your choices, in the way people talk about you when you're not there. It's shaped by how you treat others when there's nothing to gain, by the way you carry yourself even when no one is watching. The men at that table didn't owe me anything, yet when they stood, they gave me something that can't be bought or requested, recognition built from something real. As they stood there, hands raised in salute, the bar fell silent. The respect in that moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, reverent, the kind that settles in your chest instead of flashing in your eyes. You could feel the weight of it in the stillness. Even those who didn't understand what was happening knew instinctively that it meant something. It's a rare kind of silence, the kind that speaks louder than applause. Respect earned through unseen deeds has a different tone than respect demanded through words. It's grounded, honest, unshakable. It doesn't rely on reputation alone, but on the proof written in small moments. The times you did what needed to be done without expectation. That's why it lasts longer than admiration. Admiration fades with trends and time. Respect stays rooted because it's built on truth. The bar owner's face told a story of realization. You could see it happening in real time. The way his assumptions peeled away, layer by layer, replaced with something closer to humility. He didn't know the details, but he knew enough to understand that those men weren't standing for just anyone. That shift, that quiet recognition, is what respect really looks like. It's not about status or hierarchy. It's about acknowledgement, the silent agreement that someone has lived a life worth standing for. Respect can't be faked. You can see the difference in people's eyes when it's real. It carries a certain gravity, a stillness that forces everything around it to slow down. In that moment, the usual noise of the bar, the laughter, the idle talk, the sound of glasses hitting wood, all fell away. The air itself seemed to pause out of courtesy. No one told anyone else to be quiet. They just were. That's what earned respect does. It commands silence without asking for it. Those men didn't need to explain their gesture. The salute was enough. It said what words couldn't. That somewhere, sometime, I had done something that mattered. It didn't need to be spoken aloud because real respect doesn't need an audience to validate it. It doesn't seek attention. It simply exists, steady and undeniable. The power of that moment wasn't in the salute itself, but in the meaning behind it. A reflection of something true, something remembered. I could feel the bar owner watching me, trying to understand what he'd missed, what part of the story he hadn't known. His earlier tone, sharp with irritation, now felt out of place. He looked smaller somehow, not because of shame, but because respect has a way of shrinking arrogance. It humbles people, not with force, but with quiet understanding. The kind that says, without words, you were wrong about this person. The other patrons didn't need the backstory either. They could read the truth in the scene in front of them. There's something universal about genuine respect. It transcends explanation. Everyone knows it when they see it. And even if they didn't know why, they knew what they were witnessing. It was something real, something earned. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting the moment breathe. It wasn't about pride or discomfort. It was about understanding the weight of what was happening, how years of quiet actions had suddenly surfaced in a single unexpected gesture. The kind of respect that comes from unseen deeds doesn't shout your name. It speaks through others. It shows up in their eyes, in their posture, in the way they choose to stand for you when you least expect it. That's what made that moment powerful, not the salute itself, but what it represented. The proof that what you do, even when no one's watching, never really disappears. It settles quietly into the world, waiting. And sometimes, when the timing is right, it finds its way back to you, carried by people who remember not because they have to, but because they choose to. The past has a way of waiting for you, patient and silent, no matter how far you try to move from it. You can drive across states, change towns, change your name even, but what you've done, good or bad, always finds a way to catch up. That night in the bar, when the owner's groan turned into stunned silence and those men stood to salute, it wasn't just a reunion of faces. It was a collision between then and now. It was every action, every decision, every forgotten moment suddenly stepping back into the light. The past has weight, and when it meets the present, it doesn't knock. It walks right in like it owns the place. The look on the bar owner's face said it all. He recognized me, but not the way those men did. To him, I was just a memory he didn't particularly want to revisit, someone tied to a night or a rumor he hadn't fully understood. That's the thing about the past. It doesn't belong to just one person. Everyone holds a version of it, shaped by what they saw, what they heard, what they believed. To him, my name came with irritation. To them, it came with respect. And standing there, I felt both versions pressing down on me at once. When the salute came, it was more than just recognition. It was history resurfacing. Every sound in that bar seemed to fade beneath it. It was as if time itself had paused, letting the past and the present face each other without interference. I could see it in the men's eyes. Memories that weren't light or easy, but ones that carried the weight of shared experience. They weren't saluting me as a person so much as what I represented. The moments that had defined us, the choices that had cost something real. The thing about past actions is that they never vanish. They just get buried under the noise of everyday life until something digs them back up. Sometimes it's a smell, a song, a place. Sometimes it's a face in a crowd or the sound of a voice you thought you'd forgotten. And when it happens, you realize that time doesn't erase, it just hides. That night, every second felt like proof of that. The respect in those men's eyes wasn't born from words or stories. It came from memory. From moments we'd lived through, moments that had probably looked ordinary from the outside, but had meant everything at the time. The bar owner didn't know that. He only saw the surface. That's the danger of living long enough to collect both good and bad echoes. You never know which one will speak first when your name comes up. The present is fragile when the past decides to step in. It bends under the weight of memory, reshaping itself to fit what's returning. The people around me that night didn't know the story, but they could feel it. The tension, the sudden shift, the quiet that filled the air like the pause between lightning and thunder. Even without the details, everyone could sense that something heavy had arrived. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to explain. The salute was explanation enough. The men who stood knew what it meant. I knew what it meant. Words would have only made it smaller. Some things are too layered, too raw, to be translated into simple sentences. You could spend hours trying to explain a single moment like that and still not capture it. The only thing you can do is stand there and let it happen. Let the past do what it came to do. The bar owner's earlier annoyance started to fade into discomfort, maybe even guilt. You could see him trying to piece things together, realizing that whatever story he'd been told wasn't the full one. He didn't speak again. He just watched, quiet, his rag hanging in midair. In small towns, stories spread like wildfire, but they lose details along the way. People remember names, not truths. They remember drama, not meaning. It's not malice, it's just human nature. But when the real story finally shows itself, it humbles everyone. I could feel the years between who I was then and who I was now stretching tight, like a thread being pulled taut. The things I'd done, the people I'd been, the moments I'd tried not to revisit, all of it standing in front of me in the form of that simple gesture. The past wasn't an enemy that night, it was a reminder. A reminder that the weight of what you've done doesn't disappear. It shapes the space you walk through, whether you realize it or not. Every eye in that bar was a witness to that collision, some with curiosity, others with quiet respect. It's strange how one act, one memory reawakened, can change how people see you without a single word spoken. The weight of the past doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it comes as acknowledgement, as proof that you lived, that you mattered, that your choices left something behind. The air was thick with that understanding. The men lowered their hands, the silence held, and for a long moment, no one moved. The bar, the people, the years between then and now, all of it existed in the same fragile breath, proof that the past never really leaves. It waits, patient, until the present is ready to remember. It's strange how the most ordinary places can hold the most extraordinary moments. A bar with sticky floors, a jukebox that can barely hum, and a neon sign buzzing like it's on its last breath. Nothing about it screamed significance. Yet somehow, that's where everything happened. That's where a single moment turned a routine stop into something that would sit in everyone's memory long after the night was over. The beauty of life is that it doesn't always save its lessons for grand stages. Sometimes, it delivers them in rooms that smell like beer and smoke, under flickering lights, in the middle of nowhere. There's something about an ordinary setting that makes an extraordinary event hit harder. When you're standing in a place so familiar, so unremarkable, and suddenly something happens that changes the air, the contrast makes it unforgettable. That's what it felt like. I'd walked into that bar expecting nothing more than a drink and a few minutes of quiet. But instead, I found myself at the center of a story that didn't belong to the night. It belonged to everything that had come before it. When the bar owner groaned, when those men stood and saluted, it wasn't just about recognition or respect. It was about the way the mundane can turn meaningful without warning. The tables, the half-empty glasses, the hum of the fridge, all of it became part of a moment no one could have scripted. The bar wasn't special, but the energy in it suddenly was. The ordinary backdrop made what happened shine brighter, like a single spark in the dark. Most people think life's big moments happen in obvious places, stages, ceremonies, planned events. But the truth is, they sneak up on you in settings that couldn't be more plain. That night proved it. The chipped wood on the bar counter, the soft sound of boots on the floor, the clinking of a glass. All of it framed something unforgettable. It reminded me that meaning isn't built by where you are, but by what happens there. The space only becomes sacred after the story settles into it. The other people in the bar probably came in for the same reason I did, to unwind, to disappear for a bit. None of them expected to witness anything more than a few drinks and the usual small-town talk. But when the salute happened, you could feel a shift. People who were half turned in their seats stopped mid-motion. Conversations trailed off. The jukebox sputtered into silence like it knew it was time to listen. The room transformed, not physically, but emotionally. Suddenly, that quiet, tired bar felt like a place of meaning. It's always like that when something real cuts through the noise. It doesn't need a stage or a spotlight. The extraordinary doesn't announce itself. It simply happens, and the ordinary world scrambles to catch up. That moment wasn't dressed in ceremony or formality. It was raw, honest, and human. The kind of thing that could only be powerful because of how unexpected it was. The smell of whiskey, the faint flicker of the neon open sign, the way the light fell unevenly across the floor, every detail seemed sharper. When something important happens, the senses cling to the small things. It's as if your mind wants to hold on to proof that it really happened, that it wasn't just imagined. I can still remember the feel of the air, heavy and still, the way one of the men adjusted his cap before lifting his hand to salute. There was no grand speech, no explanation, just that one, pure act. The bar owner's earlier tone echoed faintly in the back of my mind, his casual annoyance now replaced by silence. He stood there, not sure what to do, as if he'd just realized that this place, his bar, his routine, was suddenly hosting something that didn't belong to everyday life. You could see the moment he understood that he was witnessing something worth remembering. His eyes softened, His posture straightened, and he stayed quiet, giving the moment room to exist. For everyone in that room, it became a story they would carry. Maybe they wouldn't remember the exact date or what song was playing before it happened, but they'd remember the feeling. They'd tell it later. The night someone walked in and turned an ordinary evening into something bigger. They might not even get the details right, but the emotion would stay. That's how moments like that live on. They embed themselves in places that don't look special, turning them into silent witnesses. That bar, with its crooked stools and dusty bottles, became more than just a stop on a map. It became proof that even the simplest corners of the world can hold something profound. That night didn't need a crowd or a camera. It didn't need preparation or permission. It just needed people who were paying attention, people who knew when to stand, when to salute, and when to let the silence speak. The extraordinary hides in plain sight. It waits quietly in ordinary places until the right moment pulls it into focus. And when it happens, when the moment breaks through the noise, everything around it, no matter how worn, how common, suddenly feels sacred, if only for a heartbeat.